Hello, Decentralized Opportunity listeners. This week, send us a text message question in honor of Maria Flynn's upcoming book, Make Opportunities Happen. My question for you is, give me a time when someone else opened a door for you that led you into something amazing, whether it was your new business venture, a new job with a company, or just something fascinating. I want to hear your story about someone who did something great for you and maybe how you can return the favor. Remember, if you click on the Send Us a Text Message button at the top of the link on your mobile phone, you'll be able to text us and send us your answer. And every week, we'll read the best and most exciting or just interesting response we have. Thank you, and enjoy the show. I'll start slow. I stalk everyone on LinkedIn that we interview, and of course, I just read your book, and we'll get to that here in a minute, definitely. But can you tell us a little bit about your background? Because your background is extensive and impressive. Can you give us that quick elevator pitch of where you started and how you ended up here today?
Sure. So I identify as a mom, an entrepreneur, and a farm kid because I think where you come from and your roots really leads you to who you are. And a lot of my entrepreneurial journey really does start back on the farm with my family, learning how to get things done. And then I went into engineering, went into entrepreneurship, so the entrepreneur in a larger company. And then I had that real itch to build something from the ground up, which is when I became an entrepreneur with Orbis Biosciences. And then through that story, and now I work with other entrepreneurs.
So what led you to want to write a book? I know it's a huge ordeal. It's also one of those things where you really are putting yourself out there. We were talking a little bit prior and you were like, yeah, man, there's personal stories about me. And we were saying that, hey, we know quite a bit about you, but you don't know anything about us because you have put yourself out there. What was the motivation for actually starting it and getting it written?
Well, when you're an entrepreneur, you wake up in the middle of the night and you think about how you're going to take advantage of an opportunity or you're going to solve a problem, and your mind is always going. And then after you sell your company, that doesn't stop. You're still doing that. But I went from waking up in the middle of the night thinking about Orbis to waking up in the middle of the night thinking about my clients' problems and the companies I was investing in, their problems. And I was having the same stories over and over again of I need to tell them that story and they can't make that mistake and they need to hear this good advice someone told me. So I started to write that down. And I thought, a book's a way to scale yourself of like, how can you have more impact? So it wasn't like I always thought, oh, I'm going to write a book someday. It was almost like I need to do this or else it's always going to keep circling in my mind. And it's a very entrepreneurial process. It's, you're creating something, you are defining the need, you are testing it out, you are launching it. So that's what I like to do. So it was just moving it kind of into a new area.
What were some of the challenges that you faced in writing the book that you found to be similar to starting a company?
Yes. So the publisher went bankrupt in the middle of it. Ooh. And can I say that shit happens?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So, that just happens all the time, in startup life. And you just, you get up, you figure out what pieces you have and you move forward. So when that happened, it was like, well, I'm used to this, but what am I going to do next? How do I pick up the pieces? Also, the perseverance that you need is very similar to an entrepreneur's journey. If you get tired and you don't know if you can read this manuscript anymore. And also when you're getting the beta feedback from potential readers, you get a lot of conflicting, somebody likes this, someone doesn't like this. So that's very similar, I think, to an entrepreneur's journey of the whiplash of feedback of, where you should go. So there was a lot of parallels, but I think probably the biggest one is just the perseverance to keep going until you've crossed the milestone.
Yeah, you mentioned in the book, I believe it's chapter 38, there's the long in the tooth syndrome, where a business, I'll let you explain it. What is long in the tooth syndrome? Because I could see that happening with a book just as much as a business.
Yes. So long in the tooth syndrome is when you're really tired and you wonder, it's getting really old and you just think, is this business going to make it? And the story I have is I'm telling the story of Orbis, and one of my entrepreneur friends said, before you got long in the tooth, and it just was like booming in my mind, long in the tooth, and I thought that was a good way to describe it. Of like, there's sometimes days you wake up, and I say, a cat has 9 lives. I felt like I was on my 15th life of like, this is getting really long.
Previously, you made a comment that I really loved when you're talking about the book and the impetus to write it. You said it was just something that you had to get out, or else it was just going to run in your head forever. And that is spot on. Something we've consistently heard from a lot of the individuals on our podcast is very similar to business ideas. I'm very fond of saying everyone has a business idea in them. And what we're finding is some people have lots of business ideas in them. And if you chase all of those paths and all of those ideas, you're going to waste time, resources, all of that. But sometimes something gets stuck in your head, right? And it just stays there, and you have to get it out, or else it's just going to eat away at you. So I love that comparison. Now, I want to hit a little bit about the farm kid story. I loved the concept of I grew up on a farm and my parents instilled this hard work and this drive in me. But can you think of a pivotal moment in your career or life where you're like, yep, I'm going to start a business. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. What was that?
Yes. So I think that was before I made the jump out of a good job. I was on a good path, and just to leave that, most people would think is insane. But it was also kind of like the need to do the book. It was a need to go explore doing something very entrepreneurial, and that I didn't want to wake up in 10, 20 years and, wish that I had tried. So it's a scary thing to do. I didn't have a family at the time, so I think that makes it less scary. But I, saved up as much money, because you're going into the unknown, you're going into the wilderness, and you're wondering if did you make a mistake? So I think the decision to start an entrepreneurial journey, particularly when it's, you're all in, it's not just something you're doing on the side while you're making money. That is a pretty pivotal point in my journey.
So we always say on this podcast that everyone has an idea for a business, and we really want them to explore the opportunity of starting one. In your opinion, what is some of the best ways that somebody can take their idea and actually get started? How do they get kickstarted? How do they get rolling?
A lot of times it is the starting that's the hardest part. So often, if you have a friend that has started, and you can see different examples and how did they get started, what resources can you start to pull together to show those initial steps, and that you have a good idea, and this is where you should go all in, because you can have lots of different ideas, but that this is the one that you want to put all your energy in. So I would say find examples of others that are, a little bit farther ahead of you, and learn from them and start to follow their path.
How do you distinguish an opportunity as something that is truly an opportunity that you should seize, compared to something that maybe is just a temptation? Maybe that they like, oh, I can make a lot of money because this is hot right now, or, oh, I could be doing this. Like, how do you make that call that it's actually something too fully invested and too fully to dive into, and that you maybe are making the right call?
Well, I think going deep into your why is really important, and that's what helps sustain you on those down days. And everybody's why is going to be a little bit different. So some people will be more money driven, some people will be more impact driven. But having that self-awareness of what your why is and how you want to change the world. Because when I think of the definition of an entrepreneur, everybody's definition is a little different. But you see it. You have a version of the world, and you see it, and you want to go create that. So for me, the why and my career path is a bit varied in the different industries, but it always filled a need of, I would call it, a save the world checkbox of like doing something important that really gives you a deep why.
I had a hard time wrapping my head around as I was stalking your LinkedIn was, Maria, you didn't just start a subscription service or, mail order things or whatever, the business could have been. you started a biotechnology and pharmaceutical company, and well, you led that, and it all the way to being procured. What was the passion there? What's your science background that led you to such a, well, for me, a complex and crazy industry?
Well, and you're right. So I didn't do it alone. So I had really great partners and really great associates that came along with me. But an engineering foundation does give you a good springboard to do lots of things in your career. And so when I talk to middle school and high school students, the value of the STEM foundation is what I call it. And I knew when I was going into engineering that some of the courses I was learning that I wasn't going to do that for the rest of my life. I was not passionate enough about some of those subjects, but I could see how it dipped me into a process that you have to come up to speed really quickly and learn things really quickly. And so I started as an environmental engineer and then healthcare IT and then pharmaceutical manufacturing technology. So very different, but a strong technical base that I could understand the concepts. I could translate it into different audiences, and I could see how I could be a valuable part of the team. And, the most important thing a leader does is get the people around them that are, great. And so that's where I could lean in and bring in the scientists that could do their work, and we could structure a place where they had autonomy to go do the best work that they could. And then I helped lead the company to achieve its goals.
How do you go about building a team like that, though? Especially, like we're in the Midwest. There is a ton of talent here. I don't want to say that there isn't, but a lot of times it can be a struggle to find people, especially in very specialized fields, and get them attracted to whatever project that you're working on. What's your strategy?
Well, and our technology was very specific. There was not a long line of people who could do the work that those folks did. So they were very important people. And even going back to Cerner days, you get people with the right attitudes and really good athletes, and you can do a lot of training internally. And so that's really. There's some core things that I look for in the people that I want to work with, are good human integrity, ability to figure things out, be really scrappy, and not afraid to go into unknown territory. And you just get the best people that you can that fits your criteria. And I've been pretty lucky.
I always say you got to look for the transitory skills as well. Like, they might be good, not specifically at what you're looking for, especially if you're doing a very specific biotech firm, but you mentioned like training them up and doing those pieces. So yeah, if you can find someone that has that strong foundation, that strong core to keep it at that, it's amazing what you can kind of shape each other into in that way.
Indeed.
Maria, in your book, Make Opportunities Happen, you talk about a lot of key subjects that entrepreneurs struggle with, productivity and the litany of things. I really liked your take on goal setting, though, and one specific part I really loved. You said there are two types of entrepreneurs: those who can tell you where they're going and those who don't know. And can you elaborate on that a little bit for our listeners about the importance of having a goal and knowing where you're headed versus let's see where we end up, and we'll try hard, but we'll see where we end up.
And a lot of things in the sections, they seem very simple, but I don't see them in practice as much, which is one of the drivers for writing the book. And really, a lot of times you can't see more than a year because a lot of things are changing in startups. But to have a very clear destination of where you want to be in the year, and then very methodically back out, well, if I want to be there in a year, where do I need to be at halfway point, at the quarter point, this month? And then once you start to have that discipline for your company, then having everybody on your team doing that so that they know their direction that they're headed. And I think that gives people a lot of comfort that they know that if I achieve these things, then I'm good, and I'm not letting anybody down. And a lot of times people will start with these, but then they'll lose the discipline. So having a rigor of, in November we start to think about this, in December we lock it down, so then by January everybody knows their path. And, when you have that discipline, it's much easier to make decisions. It's much easier to explain, where it is, and much easier to adjust when new information comes in because you have a line of sight of where you're going, versus something pretty ambiguous, because then that you're more at risk to kind of the waves that come out at you, or the shiny object syndrome, or some of those things, because you don't have as clear vision and steadiness towards a certain goal.
I think one of the major kind of counter arguments we hear about, setting goals and writing them out and all of this stuff is and you said it is flexibility. I think I say a lot, but several people I've talked to, they say that either goal setting is hard or it falls off and it falls, to the wayside. But more importantly, they feel that maybe being a bit more loose with their goals or where they want to be in a year or 2 years allows them to be flexible and catch opportunities instead of having a goal they're driving towards at the end. What do you think to that? Do you think the loosey-goosey goal does allow for that kind of agile perspective? Or do you feel that the structured goal setting allows more for the incoming obstacles that are going to come your way and allow you to react?
So I think, you definitely need to be flexible as new information comes up, but there are some things that you definitely know that you want to hit. So you want to know you demonstrate product market fit. If you're in a place to be making money, you will be wanting to have some revenue. So in the book, I say, $500,000 in revenue is better than 100 super turbos, because you don't know if maybe the market wants turbo supers instead of super turbos. So that's a way that you can allow for some flexibility, and not pin yourself down, so that you can learn and you can adjust. But I think it's kind of an excuse to not have something down of where you want to go. And definitely, by all means, if you decide there's no revenue to be generated here, it really needs to be all into product development, and you have that realization at month 6, you can make adjustments. But I think having a balance of flexibility and true to a goal, because if you keep throwing the goals out, then they're never going to mean anything to anyone, and it's going to be really hard to get a team to care, because they'll always think that that this flexibility means it doesn't matter. Wherever we end up in a year is fine.
Yeah, thank you.
Along those lines, too, it always feels like the urgent always gets in the way of the important. What advice do you have to kind of keep everything on the rails? It feels like you're just constantly putting out fires, but you can't, because the big goals are so far out, whether it be 6 months, a year, or longer, they seem so far away. How do you keep yourself aimed directly at those and not just kind of veering off into weird tangents?
That's a great question. And how I think of urgency is very aligned with importance. So how can I make the things that are important? How do I have urgency for the things that are important? And there's a section in the book called Urgency Builders. And that's, if there's one theme of my life at Orbis, it was always strategizing. How do we align our urgency with our other partners so that they want to go as fast as we need to go? And so I don't necessarily think of urgency as the fires. I think of it as, where I need to be putting my attention. And then if you're, a lot of times you're always thinking about what can go wrong and putting insurance in place or having redundancies and things like that. And so that when the fires do come up, you're in a safer place. A lot of what I think of as my role is how do I keep this team as safe as possible? Because, something bad's going to come up around the corner. And so how have I insulated the team so we're going to be okay and we're going to be able to adjust and ride whatever unexpected thing comes. And it turned out okay.
You've been wildly successful in your career, but sometimes failure in entrepreneurship can be a little taboo. Can you give me an example or discuss a time when you faced failure and how you used that as a learning opportunity?
And I thought a lot about that question when I was writing the book, because I thought you can't have a book like this without addressing failure. And I think it was the last section I wrote because I knew I wanted to get to 40, and I knew this needed to be in here. But I really struggled with what was the best story, because I tried to start each little section with a story. And because every time I would think about, well, that was a failure, but I didn't think of it so much as a failure because it just informed what I should do next. I mean, obviously there would be things that I wouldn't do again, particularly if there was a hire that didn't work out. Those are some of the most painful missteps. But I really had a difficult time coming up with the failure. And then the story that I told in the book was about Techstars leaving Kansas City, and how I really took that personally. And when I look back, there was very little control that I had over that decision. Failure is just intertwined with being an entrepreneur, because you're always learning and adjusting. And I think that my approach is really a pretty healthy approach of like, it's just part of it. It's a fact of life. But the fact that it was so difficult for me to go back and think about those stories meant it kind of just wove into it. And the failure actually becomes part of the success, which I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's how I thought about it.
Yeah.
Along those lines, too, you talk about a valuable voice. So how do you go about having the right inner self-talk? Because it can easily skew so negative. You can get imposter syndrome. You can talk yourself out of doing things, especially if they're difficult and scary. What is your advice to people to kind of control those pieces and keep themselves on the right track there?
And I think that is really key, really for all humans, but particularly entrepreneurs, because you are out in scary territory for you, because you're doing something new. And I've had friends that could really just let things roll off their backs, and I was always envious of, how do they do that? They have really strong, valuable voices, and they could really control the vicious voice if they had it at all. And the vicious voice is meant to keep us safe and not go into, crazy territory. But just knowing when the vicious voice is helping you, and a lot of times it isn't. So how do you mitigate it and temper it, and then let the valuable voice be louder? So in that section of the book, it's really about awareness. Like, a lot of times we have these voices and we don't even know they're there. So knowing what are the things we keep telling ourselves that is helping us, and what are the things that isn't. And so knowing those limiting behaviors. And then, but taking a next step is the valuable voice. How do you reinforce that? How do you say it more? How do you make it louder, amplify it? And the vicious voice, when you start to hear it, how do you counter it and adjust it? So a lot of times it's a go-to phrase that will help you. Within a team, you can know this about your co-founders or your close teammates and help them. So those are the strategies that I think about.
I keep going back to, and I know it makes sense to you. It might make sense to everyone else, but for me personally, I keep going back to, you led a biotech company very successfully, and now you're into helping other entrepreneurs, and you speak so eloquently and from your own personal experience, but who were some of your role models, whether they be individuals in history or books you read, or who was someone or some people that you genuinely looked up to in the entrepreneurial world to kind of guide you on your path?
And that I do go back to my parents and growing up at the dinner table with them and what they saw. So one story I tell in the book is my parents had some rental properties, and somebody left overnight, and it was at a time where it was difficult to rent spaces, and so they created a pop-up store before, 30 years before I heard the word pop-up store, and they just made it work. And you got this problem, this is how you're going to solve it. And then when they had a renter, well, that's done. We have a sale, we move on. And so they were always very powerful voices in my head. Neil Patterson, the founder of Cerner, one of the co-founders of Cerner, getting to work with him and hearing his voice was strong in my head going through Orbis. I had strong mentors. And so I had one really key mentor, and then I had kind of a coalition of advisors. And those were people that had done things, in my space that, and had valuable insight. So really at each turn, I was trying to find the most valuable voices to surround me. And those are, because a lot of times when you're in that, you're making a decision or you're in a hard situation, those are the voices that I would listen to, and like, what would they do if they were here? And you can't have too many, I don't think. I think if you have like a handful, that's more helpful.
What advice would you give someone who is seeking a mentor? And I asked this question half for the show and half for myself. And what I'm saying is, I think a lot of people can talk themselves out of getting a mentor, whether it's a formal or informal kind of situation. But I think as time goes on, at least myself, it dawns on me that maybe I don't know everything. I know it took me a long time to get there, but I finally got there. What advice would you give me or anyone listening who wants to find a mentor? How do you go about doing that?
Well, it's all about connection of, it's a two-way street. Who wants to mentor you and who will you get the most value from? And my primary mentor started through a program that was a matching program, so Pipeline Entrepreneurs. And we had a mentor for a year. And then next thing you know, we had talked to each other weekly for 12 years. So it was a very important relationship. And how I chose that was I really wanted somebody who had the mind of my client. And so somebody who would license in pharmaceuticals. And neither of us would have thought that, we would be talking that long, that many years later. So that was a really important one. And, I think you really want to know the person before you say, yeah, this is, because you put a big investment both directions. And so I think you'd really want to know that person before you'd be like, yeah, this is my mentor. I seek mentoring from lots of people, and anybody who's a year and a half ahead of me, if I could get 30 minutes with a call, I'm going to learn something and they're going to mentor me, and that's going to be valuable. But to have, one key mentor, and I think if you do this right, you can't have too many mentors. I think, if you do it right, you're really putting a lot of time and energy into one relationship. And then, over your life, sometimes it's a different need that you have, and finding those key people. And then when you mentor other people, it's very rewarding. So I think on an entrepreneur's journey and an entrepreneur's journey, your mentor is probably your most important relationship that you can develop.
And to expand that out a little bit too, so we're all kind of the average of the people that we hang out with or we spend a lot of time with. How do you go about building up your entire community? The one-on-one with the mentor is amazing, but you're going to have all sorts of people around you. How are you going about making sure that you're spending time with people that are going to help prop you up and build you up and provide some good value?
Well, and the book has 4 different sections of 10, and one of them is support system. And so that just shows how important I think that is to you. So it's not just your co-founders or your early employees or your mentor. It's your board and your consultants and your tribe of people that are going through experiences like you are, that you can get good ideas. They can ask you hard questions when you are feeling certain ways. And it's a pretty unique path. So if you haven't gone through some of these things, they're difficult to talk about. So to have that tribe of people that you can call up and say, hey, this is happening. What would you do? So there's a lot of elements to a support system. And so that's why I spend so much time in the book going through each of those elements, because I think a lot of times people overlook all the great relationships they have. And I would do it too. I'd be trying to figure out a problem, and then I'd talk to somebody and they'd say, well, have you called Mike? So somebody very close to me that I didn't even think, oh yeah, he would have guidance on this, which is why if you write it down and you have a table of like, these are all my go-to people for these certain things, then it's like it's a crutch for when you go into that, how am I going to solve this, rather than trying to do it all yourself.
Maria, you seem like such a positive person, and there is one specific sentence in your book. I even wrote it on a sticky note next to my desk, and that's, you can't expect others to be more pro you than you. And that was just a sentence that slapped me in the face and made a lot of sense to me. And I love that concept and that confidence. Does that confidence come naturally to you, or have you been shaken before and kind of had to build yourself back up?
Well, interesting, because I would consider confidence as my Achilles heel, but I do have deep faith in myself to figure things out. So that's one of the things I'm trying to reconcile, is I don't know how I can have those two things simultaneously, but it seems to have worked for me. But it's something, self-confidence is something that I've always worked on. So for you to say that, wow, you made my year.
Well, I'm more than happy to do that. Thank you.
It's the mighty voice, or
Yes.
that's the point of it.
Yes.
So what is your top 3 pieces of advice that you'd give to a new entrepreneur who's wanting to go out and start their own venture?
I think the mentor is one of my top ones. If you can find the right mentor, they can keep you from making missteps and keep you safe and ask the right questions. I think starting, because a lot of times we marinate forever on things, and then 3 years later we're still thinking about that idea, and I think that's a bad place to be. So I think if you start and you chunk it small, and then you will get the answer of yes, I should keep going, or no, I don't like doing this. So just starting. And then if it's a third, I think it's the power of the mindset, which is why it's incorporated throughout the book, because I think that is your biggest thing driving you forward, or the biggest thing holding you back. And there are things that you can do to get it moving the way you want. So I think really being conscious of what you're thinking, what you're saying, because it really impacts your ability to make opportunity happen.
So I'm gonna stop hounding you about your knowledge in the book for a minute, and I want to know what is next for you, and where what this book, this once again, we talked about it. You put yourself out there, you put your stories out there, and I applaud that. I think that's very brave. What are you hoping to get next? What's your next chapter? Not in the book. For Maria.
Right. So I am speaking on the book, and so I am enjoying, where this adventure is taking me, and meeting people like you. So that's been really fun. So I hope to ride that as long as I can. I help create a few things around Kansas City, Digital Health KC being one of them. We have a cluster of digital health companies, so that's been really invigorating. I work with some innovators around the region. But I do have the urge to go back in and build, focus on one enterprise. So we'll see. I haven't identified it yet. Otherwise, I would be doing it. But right now, these projects have been great. And then my kids do keep me quite busy. So they are one of my enterprises.
So Maria, where can people find you online?
I would love to connect with them on LinkedIn and on makeopportunityhappen.com. There is, the templates are out there. There is a newsletter that you can join. There is a form to tell me how you're making opportunity happen, because I really want to interact with the community and, see where this evolves, if there are pieces that are missing, or what other people are doing, so that we can bring those to the entrepreneurs. Because part of the impetus for the book is, it can be a lonely path sometimes, and how do we make it less lonely, even if it's through the voice in a book? And so how do we bond together? So that's how I'd love to connect with your audience.
Perfect. Yeah, I really loved reading your book, and I really like how it's formatted as well. It's, part personal stories, part easy to follow steps, and then part workbook, which I found really valuable. So if you're going through those stages, or even if you just have specific parts that you're struggling with, you can kind of print those out, go along, follow them like for a week or a month or however long you need. And at any point too, you can just go back and refresh. Like, it feels like you don't have to read it in chronological order, which is really nice too.
I appreciate that. And you don't have a lot of time. So if you have one problem you need to solve, can you jump to that section, was one of the thoughts with this book. And kind of like a cookbook. Okay, I need to know how to make enchiladas. Can I jump there and learn the steps? And then also I hope they make, this is a recipe for enchiladas, but I like enchiladas spicier or whatever. So it's a starting point to get started. And then, but it's not, hard. There are no hard rules. You evolve it to what works for you.
I love it. That's what I found valuable about it. I feel like a lot of books in the same vein are a prescription, and it didn't come off that it was a very easy, comfortable read where I didn't feel pressured. You don't have to do this. You can skip this template if it's not relevant to you, and that was wonderful. But once again, to shout it out there, Maria Flynn. The book is called Make Opportunity Happen, makeopportunityhappen.com. You can go there. You can join the newsletter, check out the templates, get that book. It was really good. I ate it up over a weekend. So I think anyone can gain a lot of value out of it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Well, thanks for joining us, and we will see everybody next week. Bye-bye.